Members, we now turn to the Social Security Extension of Young Person Services and Remedial Matters Amendment Bill. And the question is that Part 1 stand part. Carmel Sepuloni.
Mr Chair, we have had much discussion about this bill since second reading and have gone back and forwards on it and reread the submissions and come to this House, Mr Chair, with the intention to oppose the bill in its current state. Mr Chair, we have lodged 3 supplementary order papers that I feel would make the bill fairer and ensure that young people are provided with much needed support. I'm going to give an overview of those amendments, Mr Chair, and then I'm sure that my colleagues will go into further detail discussing those amendments. This bill, as we know, Mr Chair, amends the Social Security Act 1964 to extend the existing youth service to all 19-year-old beneficiaries with children and 18 and 19-year-old beneficiaries without children considered at significant risk of long-term welfare dependency. We, on this side of the House, Mr Chair, support young people having access to educational and employment opportunities and support state support for services that are well placed to provide the type of educational and employment support that I've just mentioned. However, we are concerned that the government has taken such a deficit approach to young people with this bill and the type of service that they're offering, and only offering to provide support if these young people tick all the boxes the government have created through their predictive risk modelling in order to be considered at risk of long-term welfare dependency. That base, Mr Chair, is really where the problems start with this bill and what the government are intending to do, because it is a deficit base. It stigmatises the young person right from the very start, and the way that the bill is currently set up excludes anybody that isn't or hasn't been identified as being at risk of long-term welfare dependency via the government's predictive risk modelling. And Mr Chair, we have no faith in the government's predictive risk modelling and are uncomfortable with the fact that that is being used to inform the government department with respect to who should get further youth support or have access to youth services. We maintain concerns around the general success of youth services, Mr Chair, given that it is a relatively new intervention and comprehensive analysis has yet to be completed. The government's current approach gives work obligations priority over educational aspirations, and we can't support that. Currently, the bill only supports young people to NCEA Level 2 or the equivalent. If these young people, Mr Chair, are going to have long-term success, then they should be equally supported onto NCEA Level 3 and higher level tertiary education, especially in light of the expected decrease in tertiary student numbers forecast in the budget. We have no idea why the government is adamant that they need to always set the bar at NCEA Level 2 and then really are not aspirational for people beyond that. In fact, as I said, it's the work obligations that then take precedence after NCEA Level 2, and that's not been aspirational for these young people, Mr Chair. Therefore, the SOP that I put up proposes amending the level of education supported in the bill to NCEA Level 2 or equivalent, but it inserts or higher, Mr Chair, in order to provide the opportunity for further education for young people. And I wonder how the government could even possibly vote against that SOP, so I hope that they are seriously considering voting for that SOP, because why would the government vote against a young person getting a higher level of qualification than the proposed NCEA Level 2? For those youth, Mr Chair, who are looking for paid employment, there needs to be the jobs for them to go into, and that's what the government fails to discuss. The government have failed to take responsibility for the lack of job creation, and the Minister of Finance, unfortunately, has now resorted to blaming young Kiwis for being, quote, pretty damned hopeless, end quote, to absolve himself of that responsibility to create the jobs. So it's all good setting up these work obligations, saying that work obligations are going to take precedence over high level of study, but actually if the jobs aren't there, then we're going to encounter issues with trying to get these young people into work. If the government don't have faith in these young people, Mr. Chair.
Carmel Sepuloni.
If the government don't have faith or have high expectations for these young people to be able to actually go on and take on these jobs, then, Mr. Chair, we're still going to struggle with our young people being able to get into employment. Of further concern is the rising number of young persons, 15 to 24 years, not in education, training or employment. And that number, Mr. Chair, is now at 87,200. And so when we're reflecting on the fact that the youth services have been in place for some time and that this bill is just an extension of that, we should all be a little bit concerned about how effective those youth services have been, given that there are 26,500 more young people not in employment or not in education since when National took office in 2008, Mr. Chair. So, as I said earlier, one of the concerns we have is that there isn't the evidence to support whether or not the youth services to date have been successful. And when we look at that not in education or employment or training figure for young people, then we have to question whether or not it has been successful to date. And if it hasn't been successful to date, or there's no evidence to support it, then why are we extending it? Mr. Chair, there are rising concerns about the ability of the current government services to support youth into quality, stable employment, given the failure of this government to facilitate benefit to work transitions for main benefits. And we've harped on and on about this, and it applies to all beneficiaries, but in this situation we're talking about youth who are on benefits, and that is the fact that the government are not accurately reporting on the numbers of people who are exiting benefit and then actually going into employment. In fact, when we look at the March 2016 figures, with only 19,730 of the 49,907 benefit cancellations actually being for going into work. So we should be concerned about the fact that people are seemingly being pushed off benefit, but the government have no care or concern for what they're actually going on to. And we see that with the better public sector target of reducing welfare dependency. That's hardly the aspirational type of target that you'd think a responsible government would set, because it's not about ensuring that those people are better off, it's just about ensuring that they're off benefit, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, while this bill currently requires certain young people to access youth services, primarily those deemed at risk of long-term welfare dependency, we feel this needs to be extended to any young person who wants the extra assistance provided through youth services, not just those that the government have identified as being at risk. In fact, if they were to apply this rule and allow those who weren't necessarily identified as at risk but were unemployed and seeking to go on benefit, if they were to apply the rule that they could actually opt into this program, it would take away that nasty deficit feeling that we currently have when we're looking at that program. So I have lodged an SOP that would allow all young persons, as in the definition in the bill, who are unemployed, not in training and are either on or apply for a benefit, to be eligible for the additional employment and educational services. So not just the ones the government decide are at risk, but any young person who feels like they might benefit from this. It takes away the stigma, and the government should support that. Mr. Chair, Labor supports the amendment that came out of the Social Services Committee report requiring consultation with the 18 or 19-year-olds in question about their referral to youth services. We support that. We do have concerns about how this bill in some instances unduly discriminates against young parents by pushing them into work even sooner than is required for parents who are on sole parent support. And we see in the Human Rights Commission, that I'm sure one of my colleagues is going to go into more detail about, that there are concerns about the level of discrimination that exists within this bill. Why should a young parent not have the same right to stay home for those first 3 years to care for their child that an older parent is able to do, Mr. Chair? In fact, I think one of the biggest flaws for the national government with respect to social development is their complete and utter undervaluing of parenting. And in this instance, Mr Chair, if a young parent decides that for those first 3 years it is in their child's best interest for them to stay home and look after them, then why wouldn't we support that? And in fact, why wouldn't we support a young person to actually enjoy that role of being a parent? There are actually long-term payoffs, Mr Chair, with respect to that child having their parent at home for a period of time to care for them. So we have put an SOP up that amends this discriminatory regulation and instead aligns it with sole parent support. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Point of order, Jamie Lee Ross.
Mr Chair,